continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations. Victor Hargrove slammed the hood of his truck closed, wiping engine grease from his calloused hands with a dirty rag. For years of sweat equity had transformed what began as a small construction company into something substantial. Not that anyone would believe it from the outside, especially not his wife's family. Still playing with your little hammers? A text from Natalie lit up his phone. Her way of diminishing his work hadn't changed in the 9 years they'd been married. Victor didn't bother responding. Tonight, her family would arrive for their biannual visit, a ritual of condescension and thinly veiled insults, primarily directed at him and his quaint attempt at entrepreneurship. He drove home to their modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. It wasn't extravagant, but it was paid for, something he'd accomplished through silent perseverance while Natalie complained about not living in a neighborhood that reflected their potential. As he pulled into the driveway, he spotted Natalie through the kitchen window, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. Her animated gestures told him everything. Another secret call to whoever had been making her smile at her phone for months now. Inside, she quickly ended her call. Finally, they'll be here in 2 hours. I need you to clean yourself up and be presentable for once. She wrinkled her nose at his work clothes. And please, if they ask about your business, don't go into tedious details. Just say it's fine and change the subject. Victor nodded, saying nothing about the call he'd just had with his business partner, Alexander Reed. After years of grinding, they'd received an acquisition offer from Meridian Construction Group, $14 million. The paperwork was finalized that morning, but Victor had kept it quiet. He wanted to see how far Natalie and her family would go in their disparagement before he revealed the truth. He showered and dressed in a simple button-down shirt and slacks, ignoring Natalie's suggestion to wear the expensive watch her father had given him last Christmas, a gift that came with the comment, "At least you'll own one valuable thing." As he straightened his collar, Victor's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Everything's set for tomorrow afternoon. The check presentation will be quite the show." Victor smiled faintly at his reflection. Patience had always been his strongest virtue. By evening, the Prescott family had invaded. Natalie's father, Douglas, a banking executive who measured worth exclusively in dollars. Her mother, Patricia, whose smile never reached her eyes. And her younger brother, Trent, who had failed upward through life on family connections. Their luxury SUV and designer luggage filled the modest entryway, bringing with them an air of superiority that seemed to instantly inflate Natalie's ego. "Victor, still driving that rust bucket I see," Douglas commented after dinner, swirling expensive scotch he brought, "because I doubt you keep anything worth drinking." "It gets me where I need to go," Victor replied simply. "That's the problem with you, son," Douglas said, the sun dripping with condescension. "No ambition, no vision. Natalie deserved someone who could give her the lifestyle she was raised to expect." Victor noticed how Natalie didn't defend him. Instead, she stared at her phone, a faint smile playing on her lips as she texted someone. Later that night, after enduring hours of thinly veiled insults about his career, his home, and his capability as a provider, Victor overheard Natalie in the kitchen with her mother. "I don't know how much longer I can do this, Mom," Natalie whispered, unaware that Victor stood in the hallway shadow. "Darling, he's just a disappointment," Patricia replied. "We all see it. You married potential that never materialized." "Brett says I deserve better," Natalie murmured. "Your boss certainly seems to think highly of you," Patricia responded with knowing emphasis. Victor silently retreated, his suspicions confirmed. Brett Sullivan, Natalie's boss at the marketing firm where she worked. The late nights, the weekend, emergencies, the sudden business trips. It all made sense now. He made his way to the living room couch that had been prepared for him because the guests need the guest room, and Trent needs his space. As he lay in the dark, Victor didn't feel anger, only a cold, clarifying resolve. Tomorrow would change everything, but not in the way Natalie or her family anticipated. Chapter 2. Revelations. Victor woke before dawn, his back stiff from the uncomfortable couch. Through the kitchen window, he watched the sun rise, painting the sky in hues of amber and gold. Today would be the day everything changed. He prepared breakfast for everyone: pancakes, bacon, fresh fruit, and coffee. A peace offering, they might think, or the actions of a man trying too hard to impress. Let them believe what they wanted. "Morning, Victor," Douglas said, emphasizing his name like it was a joke. "Playing house husband today?" "Just being hospitable," Victor replied, sliding a plate of pancakes across the counter. Natalie entered, already dressed immaculately for the day, not bothering to thank Victor for breakfast. She kissed her father's cheek and poured herself coffee, checking her phone immediately. "So, Victor," Douglas began after everyone had gathered at the table, "Natalie tells us your little construction venture is struggling. Have you considered getting a real job? I'm sure I could find something entry-level at the bank. Nothing fancy, mind you, but steady." Victor speared a piece of pancake. "What makes you think it's struggling?" "Well," Douglas exchanged glances with Natalie, "my daughter says you've been taking on fewer projects, working longer hours, and seems stressed about money. Classic signs of a failing small business." Victor turned to Natalie. "Interesting interpretation of our conversations." Natalie shifted uncomfortably. "Don't be sensitive, Victor. Daddy's trying to help. What about that loan you took out last year?" Trent chimed in, mouth full of bacon. "Natalie mentioned you had to borrow against the house." Victor set down his fork. "Did she?" "Don't be embarrassed," Patricia interjected with syrupy sweetness. "Everyone has financial troubles at some point. They're usually not in their 40s. "I'm 38, Victor corrected. "Time flies when you're not accomplishing much," Douglas laughed, reaching for the syrup. Victor smiled tightly and passed it to him. "Indeed it does." After breakfast, Victor excused himself to make a phone call. In the backyard, away from prying ears, he confirmed the afternoon's arrangements with Alexander. Everything was set. When he returned inside, he overheard Natalie in the study, her voice low and intimate. "I can't talk long. They're just as awful as I described." "Yes," he made breakfast, trying to impress them as usual. "No, I haven't told him yet. I'm waiting for the right time. Yes, I know we agreed on this weekend. I promise after they leave. I love you too." Victor stepped away, his resolve hardening. Not only was Natalie having an affair, but she was planning something, likely to ask for a divorce once her family left. The timing couldn't be more perfect. Throughout the day, the Prescotts continued their passive-aggressive commentary. Victor endured it silently, watching the clock. At 3 o'clock, he suggested everyone gather on the back patio for afternoon coffee. "I have a small surprise," Victor said mildly. "Please don't tell me you're dragging us to one of your construction sites," Trent groaned. "Nothing like that," Victor assured them. "Just thought we could enjoy the weather." As they settled onto the patio furniture, Victor's phone pinged. Right on time. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, walking toward the front of the house. Minutes later, he returned, followed by Alexander Reed in a tailored suit, and behind him, a photographer from the local business journal. "Everyone, this is my business partner, Alexander," Victor announced. The Prescotts stared in confusion. Alexander was clearly wealthy. From his Italian shoes to his Rolex watch, he exuded success in the language the Prescotts understood. "Pleasure to meet Vic's family at last," Alexander said warmly, though his eyes were calculating as they swept over the group. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion, but we wanted to make this official." He nodded to the photographer. "Make what official?" Natalie asked, standing up. Alexander removed an envelope from his jacket. "The buyout, of course. Meridian Construction couldn't be happier with the acquisition." Douglas frowned. "Acquisition? Of Victor's company?" Alexander looked genuinely surprised. "You didn't tell them, Vic?" Modest as always. He turned to the family. "Hargrove Construction has developed a proprietary modular building system that reduces construction time by 40% while meeting all sustainability requirements. Meridian has been pursuing us for months." Before anyone could respond, Alexander held out the envelope to Victor as the photographer positioned himself. $14 million buyout. "Congratulations," he announced, shaking Victor's hand as the camera flashed. A crash made everyone turn. Natalie had dropped her coffee cup, dark liquid spreading across the patio stones. Her face had drained of color. "F-14 million," she stammered. Victor walked over to his wife, leaning close to her ear. "I know about Brett," he whispered. "And as of this moment, you get nothing." Natalie's knees buckled, and she collapsed in her chair, gasping for breath. Chapter 3. Consequences. The patio had fallen silent except for Natalie's ragged breathing. Victor straightened up, tucking the envelope into his pocket while the Prescotts stared in shock. "Are you all right, Mrs. Hargrove?" the photographer asked, lowering his camera. "She's fine," Victor answered smoothly. "Just overwhelmed by the good news. We've kept this very quiet. Security reasons, you understand. Corporate espionage is a real concern in our industry." Alexander nodded knowingly. "That's why we insisted on confidentiality agreements. Even family couldn't know until it was finalized." Douglas Prescott recovered first, his banker's instincts kicking in as the scent of money filled the air. "Victor, my boy," he boomed, rising to clap him on the shoulder. "You've been holding out on us. This calls for a celebration." Victor stepped away from his touch. "Alexander, would you mind giving me a moment with my family? I believe we have some private matters to discuss." "Of course," Alexander replied. "I'll wait out front with Martin. We still need those final signatures for the transfer." Once Alexander and the photographer had gone, Victor turned to the Prescotts. Douglas was beaming, Patricia was straightening her blouse, as if preparing to be photographed, and Trent was already on his phone, likely updating his social media. Only Natalie remained frozen, her face ashen. $14 million, Douglas said reverently. "I had no idea your little operation was worth that much." "You weren't supposed to," Victor replied coldly. "And it wouldn't have been if I'd listened to Natalie's constant criticism or your belittling advice." "Now, Victor," Patricia began, her tone suddenly honeyed, "family can sometimes be too honest, but it's only because we care." Victor laughed, a sound without humor. "Is that what you call it? When you whispered to Natalie last night that I was just a disappointment? When Douglas here suggested I get an entry-level bank job? When Trent mocked my truck and my clothes?" The Prescotts exchanged uncomfortable glances. Natalie finally found her voice. "Victor, please," she said weakly. "Let's talk about this privately." "What?" Victor asked. "You've had no problem discussing our marriage with your family. Or with Brett Sullivan." Natalie's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "Brett." Douglas frowned. "Your boss, Natalie?" Victor smiled thinly. "More than her boss for the past 8 months. Isn't that right, Natalie?" Patricia gasped. Trent's phone slipped from his fingers. "This is absurd," Natalie sputtered. "Victor's just trying to distract from—" "From what?" Victor interrupted. "From the fact that while I was building a multi-million-dollar company, you were planning to leave me? That you and Brett were going to tell me this weekend, after your family left?" Natalie's silence was confirmation enough. "You've been checking his texts," she finally said, her voice hardening with accusation rather than remorse. "I didn't need to," Victor replied. "You've been careless. Hotel receipts in your car. Late-night calls in the bathroom. The sudden business trips that Brett also happened to take. And just this morning, I heard you on the phone with him." Douglas cleared his throat. "This is a private matter between you two. Perhaps we should." "No," Victor cut him off. "You don't get to slither away now. For years, you've treated me like dirt beneath your shoes. You've encouraged Natalie to see me as a failure. You've undermined our marriage at every opportunity. We only wanted the best for her." Patricia protested weakly. "The best?" Victor's voice remained measured but cold. "The best would have been supporting her marriage. The best would have been respecting her husband. Instead, you validated her worst instincts, her materialism, her entitlement, her disloyalty." "That's not fair," Natalie said, tears now streaming down her face. "You were never here. Always working, always at job sites, always with Alexander. Building something," Victor responded. "Building a future while you were tearing it down." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen, then turned it to face them. On display was a series of text messages between Natalie and Brett. Intimate, explicit, damning. "How did you get those?" Natalie whispered. "It doesn't matter," Victor said, pocketing the phone. "What matters is I have them, along with hotel receipts, credit card statements, and photographs. All documented and already delivered to my attorney this morning. Douglas stepped forward, his banker's mind calculating rapidly. Now, Victor, I'm sure we can work something out. Marriages hit rough patches. This isn't a negotiation, Victor interrupted. It's an announcement. I've filed for divorce on grounds of adultery with substantial evidence. Given Minnesota's laws, Natalie's infidelity will be considered in the division of assets. You can't just, Natalie began. I already have, Victor stated firmly. The papers were served to your office this morning. Brett received his copy as well. Natalie's phone began ringing. She fumbled for it, saw Brett's name on the screen, and answered shakily. Brett? What's happening? Victor could hear the panic in Brett Sullivan's voice from where he stood. After a moment, Natalie lowered the phone, her expression horrified. He's been fired, she whispered. The company has a strict policy against managers having relationships with direct reports. They received anonymous evidence this morning. Victor nodded once. Consequences. You vindictive bastard, Natalie hissed, her shock turning to anger. You planned all of this. No, Victor corrected her. I simply decided not to be your victim anymore. Alexander and I have been working on this deal for months, long before I discovered your affair. The timing is fortunate. He turned to Douglas. You and your family need to leave. Now, pack your things and go to a hotel. This is Natalie's house too, Patricia objected. Actually, Victor replied, the house is solely in my name. Natalie insisted on keeping her name off the deed to protect her credit when we bought it. Another fortunate decision. Douglas puffed up. You can't just throw us out. I can and I am, Victor stated calmly. You have 30 minutes, or I call the police and report you for trespassing. As the reality of the situation sank in, the Prescotts' arrogance crumbled. 30 minutes later, they were gone, luggage hastily packed, Natalie sobbing in the back seat of her parents' SUV as they drove away. Victor stood in the driveway, watching them disappear. Alexander approached from his parked limousine. That went well, Alexander commented. Phase 1, Victor replied. They have no idea what's coming next. Chapter 4, Aftermath. 3 weeks after the Prescotts' disastrous visit, Victor sat in his attorney's office reviewing documents. The spacious corner suite offered panoramic views of downtown Minneapolis, a stark contrast to the cluttered cubicle where Natalie now worked as a customer service representative, the only job she could secure after being blacklisted in the marketing industry. She's asking for half of everything, despite the evidence of infidelity, said Dominic Weathers, Victor's attorney. The silver-haired lawyer had initially seemed too polished, too establishment for Victor's taste, but his ruthless efficiency had quickly proven his worth. That's not surprising, Victor replied, scanning the counter-proposal from Natalie's lawyer. What is surprising is that she thinks she has leverage. Dominic leaned back in his leather chair. Most clients in your position would settle. Offer her $1 million or $2 million to go away quietly. I'm not most clients, Victor said, his voice hardening. And this isn't just about money. Revenge is expensive, Dominic cautioned, both financially and emotionally. Victor looked up, his eyes cold. Then it's fortunate I have resources to spare. After the meeting, Victor drove to a small cafe in a quiet neighborhood. Inside, a tall, athletically built man waited at a corner table. Frank Donovan had served in military intelligence before becoming a private investigator. His services didn't come cheap, but his discretion and thoroughness were worth every penny. What did you find? Victor asked without preamble, sliding into the seat across from him. Frank pushed a manila folder across the table. Brett Sullivan isn't the first married man Natalie's been involved with. Victor nodded, unsurprised. How many? 3 that I could confirm over the past 5 years. All men in positions to advance her career. All married. Frank tapped the folder. Timeline, hotel receipts, photographs, witness statements from hotel staff. The works. And the Prescotts. Frank's expression turned grim. That's where it gets interesting. Douglas Prescott's banking career isn't as sterling as he pretends. He's been investigated twice for ethical violations. Both times, charges were dropped after witnesses suddenly changed their stories or evidence disappeared. Bribes? Almost certainly, but nothing provable. What is provable is that he helped several clients, including his son Trent, hide assets during divorce proceedings. Frank lowered his voice. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on the most recent case. Victor absorbed this information, connecting dots in his mind. And Patricia? Social climber with expensive habits. 3 DUIs in the past decade, all quietly handled through family connections. She's on the board of several charities, but schemes donations to fund her shopping addiction. Trent failed upward his entire life. Currently works at his father's bank in a position created specifically for him. Has a gambling problem he hides from the family. Owes nearly $200,000 to some unsavory characters. Victor sat back, processing this information. Good work. Frank hesitated. There's one more thing. Brett Sullivan isn't just Natalie's lover. They've been planning something beyond an affair. Victor leaned forward. Go on. They opened a joint account 6 months ago. Small deposits at first, then larger ones. Over $120,000 now. Money that appears to have come from your joint accounts with Natalie. Small withdrawals, time to avoid suspicion. A muscle tightened in Victor's jaw. She's been stealing from me. There's more. They purchased property together, a cabin on Lake Minnetonka. Paid in cash. The deed is in Brett's brother's name. Victor's eyes narrowed. They were planning their exit long before I discovered the affair. Appears so, Frank confirmed. And based on text messages my tech guy recovered, they were going to tell you about the divorce the weekend her family visited. The timing of your business deal threw off their plans. Victor stood, dropping several $100 bills on the table. Send me everything. And keep digging, especially into Douglas's banking activities and Trent's gambling debts. I want to know who he owes and how desperate they are to collect. As Victor drove home to the empty house, Natalie was staying with her parents while the divorce proceeded. He felt not anger, but a cold, calculating clarity. The Prescotts and Brett Sullivan had underestimated him for years. They had mistaken his patience for weakness, his silence for acceptance. That mistake would cost them everything. Chapter 5, Strategies. I want to destroy them, Victor stated calmly, sitting across from Alexander in the new offices of their consulting firm. After selling their construction company, they had established Hargrove Reed Strategic Consulting, specializing in construction industry mergers and acquisitions. Alexander raised an eyebrow. All of them? That's ambitious, even for you. They're connected, Victor explained. The Prescotts, Brett, Natalie, they operate as a unit. Douglas provides financial advice, Patricia handles social connections, Trent does whatever dirty work needs doing, and Natalie. He paused. Natalie identifies targets and makes them vulnerable. And you think you were just another target? Alexander asked. Victor nodded. One that didn't work out as planned. They expected a failing contractor they could bleed dry and discard. Instead, they found someone who built something valuable, something they now want a piece of. Alexander leaned forward. I'm with you, whatever you need. But let's be smart about this. What exactly do you have in mind? Victor opened his laptop, displaying a complex flowchart. I've mapped out their vulnerabilities, connections, and pressure points. Each of them has something to lose beyond money, reputation, freedom, relationships. We exploit those vulnerabilities systematically. Starting with Brett Sullivan, Victor replied. He's the weakest link. No family connections to protect him, a new job hanging by a thread, and a hidden relationship with Natalie he's desperate to preserve. The next day, Brett Sullivan arrived at his new office, a small marketing firm that had hired him despite the scandal at his previous company. Before he could even set down his briefcase, his phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown. Hello. Brett answered warily. Mr. Sullivan, Victor's voice came through clearly. I hope you're settling into your new position. Brett's face hardened. What do you want, Hargrove? Just checking in, Victor replied pleasantly. I understand congratulations are in order. New job, new lakefront property. You've been busy. Brett froze. I don't know what you're talking about. The cabin on Lake Minnetonka. Lovely area. Though it's interesting you put it in your brother Michael's name. Tax purposes, perhaps. Brett's voice dropped to a whisper. How did you? I know everything, Brett, Victor interrupted. The cabin. The joint account with Natalie. The $120,000 you've been accumulating, money taken from my accounts. I even know about the plans you made to leave once the divorce was finalized. That's none of your business, Brett hissed. Actually, it is. That money belongs to me, and I want it back. All of it. Brett laughed nervously. Or what? You'll tell your divorce attorney? Go ahead. Natalie will still get half of your millions. I'm not concerned with what Natalie gets from the divorce, Victor stated calmly. I'm concerned with what she and her family have already taken. Return the money by the end of the week, or I'll be forced to take action. Is that a threat? Brett demanded. It's a courtesy, Victor replied. One I'm not obligated to extend. After ending the call, Brett immediately called Natalie, who was staying with her parents. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Panicking, he tried Douglas Prescott's number. Sullivan. Douglas answered coldly. The Prescotts had been cool toward Brett since the revelation of the affair and the subsequent loss of Natalie's claim to Victor's fortune. He knows about the cabin, Brett blurted, and the money. He wants it all back by the end of the week. A long silence followed. Come to the house, Douglas finally said. Use the back entrance. We need to discuss this privately. That evening, the Prescotts and Brett gathered in Douglas's wood-paneled study. The atmosphere was tense, accusatory. You assured me the cabin purchase couldn't be traced, Douglas snapped at Brett. It shouldn't have been, Brett defended. We used cash. The deed is in Michael's name. There's no paper trail connecting it to us. Obviously there is, Patricia interjected, her voice brittle with anger. The question is, what else does he know? Trent, pacing nervously, stopped suddenly. Does he know about the other accounts? The ones for after the divorce. Douglas shot his son a warning look, but the damage was done. What other accounts? Brett asked, looking between them. Nothing that concerns you, Douglas replied dismissively. The immediate issue is this threat from Victor. We need to determine how serious it is. It sounded very serious, Brett insisted. He wasn't angry or emotional. He was cold, calculated. He's bluffing, Douglas declared. He has no proof of where that money came from. It could have been Natalie's savings, gifts from us, anything. Natalie, who had been silent until now, looked up. What if he's not bluffing? What if he goes to the police? With what? Douglas scoffed. Allegations that his soon-to-be ex-wife and her boyfriend bought property together? That's not illegal. The money might be, Natalie said quietly, if he can prove I took it from our accounts without his knowledge. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then we need leverage, Douglas finally said. Something to make him back off. I have an idea, Trent offered, a malicious glint in his eye. Victor cares about his reputation, right? His precious business? What if something happened to damage that? What are you suggesting? Douglas asked, eyeing his son with newfound interest. A whisper campaign, Trent explained. Rumors about how he really got that buyout deal. Suggestions of insider trading, bribery, cutting corners on projects. That won't work, Brett objected. The construction industry knows and respects Victor. No one would believe it. They would if it came from a credible source, Trent countered. Like a banking executive with connections throughout the financial industry. He looked meaningfully at his father. Douglas stroked his chin thoughtfully. It could work. Nothing direct, nothing actionable, just concerns raised in the right ears. Enough to make Meridian nervous about their acquisition. And if they get nervous enough, Trent continued, they might delay payments, request additional audits, even try to back out of the deal. Which would give us leverage, Douglas concluded with a cold smile. What none of them realized was that their entire conversation was being recorded by devices Frank Donovan had planted throughout the Prescott home days earlier. Miles away, Victor listened as his enemies plotted against him, a thin smile playing on his lips. Predictable, he murmured to himself. Every single one of them. Chapter 6. Countermoves. The next morning, Douglas Prescott arrived at First National Bank, where he served as executive vice president. He nodded curtly to the security guard, rode the elevator to the executive floor, and walked briskly to his corner office. As he settled behind his mahogany desk, his assistant knocked lightly on the door. Mr. Prescott, the board has called an emergency meeting. They're waiting in the conference room. Douglas frowned. What meeting? There's nothing on my calendar. It was just called, sir. They said it's urgent. Straightening his tie, Douglas made his way to the conference room, mentally reviewing any issues that might require emergency attention. When he entered, the entire board of directors sat around the table, along with the bank's general counsel and a man Douglas didn't recognize. Douglas, the chairman, William Foster, said gravely, "Please take a seat." As Douglas sat, Foster gestured to the stranger. "This is Special Agent Richard Calloway with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit." Douglas felt the blood drain from his face, but maintained his composure. "What's this about, William?" Foster slid a folder across the table. "The FBI has presented us with evidence of serious ethical breaches, possibly criminal actions, involving several of our high-net-worth clients." Douglas opened the folder to find documentation of exactly what Frank Donovan had described to Victor, evidence of how Douglas had helped wealthy clients hide assets during divorces, including detailed records of transactions, offshore accounts, and communications. "This is absurd," Douglas blustered. "These are legitimate financial services for our clients." Agent Calloway leaned forward. "Mr. Prescott, we have recordings of you explicitly discussing how to hide assets from divorce courts. That's not a legitimate financial service. It's conspiracy to commit fraud." "Recordings?" Douglas echoed, his voice weak. "From your own office," Calloway confirmed. "Apparently, someone has been documenting your activities for some time." Douglas's mind raced. Victor had moved faster and more aggressively than anticipated. Foster cleared his throat. "Douglas, the board has voted to place you on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We've also frozen your accounts with the bank as a precautionary measure." "You can't do that," Douglas protested. "I've been with this institution for 27 years. "Which makes this betrayal all the more disappointing," Foster replied coldly. "Security will escort you to your office to collect personal items and then off the premises." As Douglas was led away, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from Trent. "Dad, something's wrong. Men in suits are in my apartment. They're asking about gambling debts and bank records." Across town, Natalie sat at her divorce attorney's office, growing increasingly frustrated. "What do you mean, take the offer?" she demanded. "It's insulting. $500,000 after 9 years of marriage to a man worth $14 million. Eleanor Blackwell, a veteran divorce attorney, sighed. "Natalie, you need to understand your position. The evidence of infidelity is overwhelming. The judge will see the text messages, the hotel receipts, the photographs. You were photographed entering hotels with Brett Sullivan on at least 12 occasions during your marriage." "But Minnesota is a no-fault divorce state," Natalie argued. "Infidelity shouldn't matter. For filing, no. But for asset division, judges have discretion. And your husband's attorney has filed a separate civil claim for theft regarding the $120,000 you and Mr. Sullivan accumulated." Natalie paled. "That's my money too." "Not according to the documentation," Eleanor replied flatly. "The withdrawals came from accounts in your husband's name only, not your joint accounts. He has bank records showing you transferred money without authorization. So I should just accept being left with nothing?" Natalie asked bitterly. $500,000 is hardly nothing, Eleanor pointed out. And given the circumstances, it's a generous offer. If this goes to court, you could easily end up with less and possibly face criminal charges. Natalie's phone rang, Brett calling for the third time that hour. She ignored it, only to have it immediately ring again with her mother's number. "I have to take this," she told her attorney, stepping into the hallway. "Mom? What's wrong?" Patricia's voice was tight with panic. "It's all falling apart, Natalie. Your father's been suspended from a bank. The FBI is investigating him. Trent is being questioned about gambling debts. And there are reporters outside our house asking about charity funds." "What? How is this happening?" "It's Victor," Patricia hissed. "He's behind all of it. He's destroying our family." As Natalie ended the call, she saw Brett approaching down the hallway, his face ashen. "We need to talk," he said urgently. "Right now." They found an empty conference room. Brett paced nervously while Natalie watched him. "I've been fired. Again," he announced. "Someone sent my new company a video." "What video?" Natalie asked, dread building. Brett couldn't meet her eyes. "Us. In the hotel, discussing plans, Natalie sank into a chair. What plans specifically? How we would get half of Victor's money in the divorce. How we'd claim emotional abuse. He trailed off. How we'd what, Brett? How we considered planting evidence if necessary, he finished quietly. Natalie covered her face with her hands. We were just talking, venting. We never actually did anything. Intent matters, Brett said hollowly. And it's all there on video. With audio. Natalie looked up sharply. How did he get video from our hotel room? Brett laughed bitterly. Does it matter? He has it. Just like he has evidence of the money you took, the cabin we bought, everything. He's 10 steps ahead of us, and he's not stopping. What do we do? Brett sat heavily across from her. I'm leaving. Today. My brother agreed to sell the cabin. At a loss, but it's cash we need. I've booked a flight to Phoenix tonight. My cousin has a construction company there. He'll give me work. You're running away? Natalie asked incredulously. I'm surviving, Brett corrected. Victor's not after my money or my reputation. He's after complete destruction. I'm getting out while I can. And what about me? Natalie demanded. What about us? Brett looked at her with pity. There is no us anymore, Natalie. There can't be. Not with Victor hellbent on revenge. I'm sorry, but you're on your own. As Brett walked out, Natalie felt her carefully constructed world collapsing. Her lover was abandoning her. Her family was under investigation. Her divorce settlement was evaporating. And her husband, the man she had dismissed as weak and unambitious, was methodically dismantling everything and everyone she cared about. She took out her phone with trembling hands and dialed Victor's number. After 4 rings, he answered. Hello, Natalie. Please, she whispered. Please stop this. A long pause followed. Stop what exactly? You know what? The investigations. The recordings. All of it. You've made your point. Have I? Victor's voice was calm, almost curious. And what point would that be? That you're powerful. That you can hurt us. That you're not the pushover we thought you were. Another pause. That's not the point at all, Natalie. The point is consequences. Actions have them. Yours. Your father's. Brett's. All of you made choices, and now you're experiencing the results. What do you want? She asked desperately. Money? I'll give back every cent. The cabin? Brett's selling it already. Just tell me what it will take to end this. It's not about what I want, Victor replied. It's about what you all deserve. And we've barely begun to explore that question. The line went dead, leaving Natalie staring at her phone in horror. For the first time, she truly understood what Victor had become. Not a wronged husband seeking recompense, but an avenging force determined to mete out justice as he saw fit. And there was nothing she could do to stop him. Chapter 7. Collapse. 1 month after Victor's revelations, the Prescott family gathered once again. Not in their elegant home, but in a small apartment Natalie had rented on the outskirts of Minneapolis. The luxury and privilege they had taken for granted had vanished with stunning swiftness. Douglas sat hunched in a folding chair, aged beyond his years. The FBI investigation had expanded to include several of his clients, all of whom had eagerly turned on him to save themselves. First National Bank had terminated him after an internal audit uncovered even more ethical violations. His accounts remained frozen, his reputation in tatters. Patricia paced nervously, checking her phone every few minutes. The charity boards she had once dominated had all requested her resignation after anonymous tips led to investigations of financial irregularities. The country club had revoked the Prescott's membership. Former friends no longer returned her calls. Trent slouched on Natalie's second-hand couch, nursing a bruised jaw, a warning from his gambling creditors, who had grown impatient after his father's fall from grace eliminated their hope of easy payment. It's been a month, Douglas said hoarsely. A month of hell. When does it end? It doesn't, Natalie replied, setting cups of cheap coffee before them. Not until he's satisfied. And when will that be? Patricia demanded. When we're all in prison. When we've lost everything. He said it was about consequences, Natalie explained, her voice hollow. About getting what we deserve. And who is he to decide what we deserve? Douglas exploded, then winced as pain shot through his chest. The stress had triggered angina attacks, adding medical bills to their mounting troubles. He's the man we underestimated, Natalie answered simply. The man we humiliated and betrayed. The man who built something valuable while we were planning to take it from him. Trent looked up, his eyes bloodshot. There has to be a way to fight back. Everyone has vulnerabilities. Not Victor, Natalie said. Not anymore. He's liquidated most of his assets. He's protected his business interests through a complex network of LLCs. He's even donated a significant portion to charity. Actual charity, not the kind of skimming Mother did. What about Alexander? Douglas suggested. His business partner. Could we get to Victor through him? Natalie shook her head. Alexander is as ruthless as Victor now. Besides, they've been friends since college. He's the godfather to Alexander's children. So we just give up? Patricia asked, her voice cracking. Except that he's destroyed us? Maybe, Natalie said quietly. Or maybe there's one last option. What? Douglas asked eagerly. Natalie looked at each of them in turn. The truth. Complete honesty. About everything. Are you insane? Trent sputtered. Dad could go to prison. We're already losing everything, Natalie pointed out. Our money, our status, our reputations. At least with the truth, there's a chance for, I don't know, not forgiveness, but perhaps an end. Absolutely not, Douglas declared. We admit nothing. Before Natalie could respond, a knock came at the apartment door. She approached cautiously and checked the peephole, then stepped back in shock. It's Victor, she whispered. The Prescotts froze, exchanging panic glances. After a moment's hesitation, Natalie opened the door. Victor stood in the hallway, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit. Behind him stood Frank Donovan and another man none of them recognized. May we come in? Victor asked politely, as if this were a social call. Wordlessly, Natalie stepped aside. Victor entered, surveying the modest apartment with its mismatched furniture and bare walls. A far cry from the luxury the Prescotts had once enjoyed. Victor, Douglas began, struggling to his feet. We need to... Sit down, Douglas, Victor interrupted calmly. You look unwell. Douglas sank back into his chair, deflated. Allow me to introduce my associates, Victor continued. You've never met Frank Donovan, but he's been an integral part of your lives recently. He's responsible for the recordings, the photographs, the financial documentation. Very thorough. Frank nodded once, his expression impassive. And this, Victor gestured to the other man, is Howard Kleinman, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Minnesota. The Prescotts' collective intake of breath was audible. Why is he here? Patricia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Kleinman has been reviewing the evidence against Douglas, Victor explained. The fraud, the conspiracy, the ethical violations. Enough to send him to federal prison for 12 to 15 years. Douglas went pale. Victor, please. I'm not finished, Victor cut him off. Mr. Kleinman has also been examining Patricia's misappropriation of charitable funds and Trent's complicity in several of his father's schemes, as well as certain questionable loans processed through First National. The Prescotts sat in stunned silence as Victor continued. Mr. Kleinman is prepared to file charges against all of you. Multiple felony counts. The evidence is overwhelming, and the U.S. Attorney's Office is confident of convictions. Why are you telling us this? Natalie asked. To gloat. Victor turned to her, his expression unreadable. No, Natalie. I'm offering an alternative. He reached into his suit jacket and removed a thick document, placing it on the coffee table. What is this? Douglas asked warily. A cooperation agreement. Howard Kleinman spoke for the first time. In exchange for full disclosure of all financial crimes committed by Douglas Prescott and his associates, the government will recommend reduced sentences. Reduced to what? Douglas demanded. For you, 3 to 5 years instead of 12 to 15, Kleinman replied. For Patricia and Trent, probation and community service instead of prison time. Provided you make full restitution to the defrauded parties, of course. Douglas looked at Victor with naked hatred. You're forcing us to confess. I'm giving you a choice, Victor corrected him. Prison for most of your remaining life, or a few years followed by a chance to rebuild. A harsh consequence, certainly, but not as harsh as it could be. And what about me? Natalie asked quietly. What's my punishment? Victor turned to her. You've already lost your marriage, your lover, your status, and your financial security. The civil judgment for the stolen funds has emptied your remaining accounts. I consider our business concluded. Natalie nodded slowly, understanding the finality in his voice. You have 24 hours to decide, Kleiman said, standing. The offer expires then. As Victor and his associates prepare to leave, Douglas surged to his feet, his face contorted with rage. You smug bastard, he snarled. You think this makes you better than us? You're just as cruel, just as vindictive. Victor paused at the door. The difference, Douglas, is that I never pretended to be anything else. You built your life on appearances, on looking down on others while hiding your own corruption. I simply revealed who you truly are. With that, he left, the door closing quietly behind him. The Prescotts sat in silence for several minutes, the cooperation agreement lying untouched on the table between them. Finally, Natalie spoke. He's right, you know, about all of us. We judged him, mocked him, betrayed him, while hiding our own ugliness. Douglas glared at her. Save your philosophical epiphanies. We need to decide what to do about this. He jabbed a finger at the document. There's nothing to decide, Natalie said firmly. You'll sign it. You'll cooperate. You'll serve your time. How dare you, Douglas began. No, Natalie interrupted, standing up. How dare you? How dare all of you? You raised me to believe I deserved more than Victor could give me. You encouraged me to cheat, to steal, to lie. And now we're all paying the price. She picked up the cooperation agreement. Sign it, Dad. It's over. Victor won. Chapter 8, Atonement. 6 months later, Victor sat in the visitors area of the Federal Correctional Institution in Duluth, waiting. The room was sparse but clean, filled with other visitors, mostly women and children seeing husbands and fathers. Victor was one of the few men visiting another man. Douglas Prescott entered in his prison uniform, the orange fabric hanging loosely on his frame. He had lost weight, and his formerly imperious posture was gone, replaced by the cautious movements of a man who had learned the hard way that he was no longer in control. When he spotted Victor, Douglas hesitated, then approached slowly and sat across from him at the small table. I didn't think you'd actually come, Douglas said, his voice raspier than Victor remembered. I said I would, Victor replied simply. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Douglas spoke again. If you came for an apology, you're wasting your time. Victor shook his head. I don't need your apology, Douglas. I know you're not sorry for what you did, only for getting caught. Douglas's jaw tightened. Then why are you here? To give you this, Victor said, sliding a folder across the table. The transcript of my conversation with Patricia yesterday. Douglas opened the folder cautiously, scanning the contents. As he read, his expression shifted from suspicion to shock. She's cooperating with the charity investigation, he murmured, telling them everything. Yes, Victor confirmed. In exchange for probation instead of prison time. She'll still have to make restitution, of course. Douglas looked up, his eyes narrow. And you arranged this? I presented the option. She made the choice. Why? Douglas demanded. Why help her after everything? Victor considered the question. Because unlike you, Patricia is actually remorseful. Not just for getting caught, but for the harm she caused. She's agreed to work with the charities to implement proper financial controls, to prevent others from doing what she did. And what about Trent? Have you helped him too? The bitterness in Douglas's voice was unmistakable. Trent's gambling debts have been settled, Victor stated. He's in a residential treatment program for his addiction. Upon completion, he'll serve 2 years probation and work in a community financial literacy program, teaching others to avoid his mistakes. Douglas stared at Victor in disbelief. I don't understand you. First, you destroy us. Now you're what? Saving us. Not saving, Victor corrected, allowing the possibility of redemption. There's a difference. And Natalie? Douglas asked, what redemption have you offered her? Something hardened in Victor's expression. None. Natalie made her choices with full awareness of their meaning. The others followed your lead, but she acted from her own selfish desires. Her consequences stand. Douglas nodded slowly, processing this information. So I'm the only one who goes to prison. You're the architect of the family's moral collapse, Victor said bluntly. The one who taught them that rules don't apply to Prescott's. That appearances matter more than integrity. That wealth and status justify any action. 3 years seems appropriate. Douglas was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, stripped of its usual arrogance. She's my daughter. Whatever she did to you, whatever person she became, I shaped her. That's on me. For the first time since entering the prison, Victor saw something genuine in Douglas Prescott. Not remorse for his crimes, perhaps, but recognition of his failure as a father. Yes, Victor agreed softly. It is. The two men sat in silence again, but the quality of it had changed. Not comfortable, not friendly, but honest in a way their previous interactions had never been. What happens after? Douglas finally asked. When I get out? That depends on you, Victor replied. Your former clients have been notified of your conviction. Your professional licenses have been revoked. The financial industry in Minneapolis knows exactly who and what you are. Douglas nodded grimly. So, I'm unemployable. In finance, yes, Victor confirmed. But I've established a foundation that works with former white-collar offenders, helping them find legitimate employment after prison. You'd qualify for the program. Douglas stared at him in confusion. Why would you do that? After everything. Victor leaned forward. Because revenge wasn't my goal, Douglas. Justice was. And true justice includes the possibility of redemption, even for people like you. As their time came to an end, Douglas stood to return to his cell. But before leaving, he asked one final question. Do you ever regret it? How far you went? Victor considered this carefully before answering. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that your family was so determined to take what wasn't theirs that only severe consequences would stop them. But do I regret protecting what I built? No, never. Douglas nodded once, accepting this answer, then turned and walked away, back to the prison wing, where he would spend the next 3 years contemplating the choices that had led him there. As Victor watched him go, he felt no satisfaction, no joy in the man's downfall. Only a grim recognition that sometimes justice required hard choices and harsher consequences. Chapter 9. Renaissance. 1 year later, Victor stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Hargrove Tower. The Minneapolis skyline spread out below him. The 50-story building represented his evolution from contractor to developer, from builder to visionary. After the sale of his construction company, he had invested a significant portion of his fortune in urban development projects, focusing on mixed-use buildings that combined affordable housing with commercial spaces. Quite a view, Alexander commented, joining him at the railing. Worth every penny and headache. Victor nodded, surveying his creation with quiet pride. The residential units are fully leased. The commercial spaces are at 80% occupancy, and the rooftop garden opens to the public next month. Speaking of the public, Alexander said carefully, have you seen the latest article? He handed Victor a copy of the Minneapolis Business Journal. The headline read, From Construction to Philanthropy, Victor Hargrove's Unexpected Journey. Victor skimmed the article, which detailed his various charitable initiatives over the past year. The reentry program for former white-collar criminals, the scholarship fund for trade school students, the urban development projects aimed at revitalizing struggling neighborhoods. They make me sound like a saint, Victor noted dryly. Hardly, Alexander chuckled. But they're not wrong about the impact you're having. Victor handed the magazine back. Impact was always the goal, building something that lasts. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Alexander spoke again. Have you heard from Natalie? Victor shook his head. Not since the divorce was finalized. Last I heard, she'd moved to Chicago. Started over. And you're okay with that? No more consequences? Her family shattered. Her lover abandoned her. Her reputation and social standing destroyed. Her share of the divorce settlement barely covered her legal fees. Victor shrugged. She's living with the consequences of her choices. That's enough. Alexander studied his friend. You've changed. Have I? Victor asked, genuinely curious. You're lighter somehow. The anger that drove you after discovering her betrayal, it's gone. Victor considered this. Not gone. Transformed. I channeled it into something productive instead of destructive. As they turned to leave the observation deck, Victor's phone rang. The screen displayed a name he hadn't expected to see, Douglas Prescott. I should take this, he told Alexander, who nodded and stepped away to give him privacy. Douglas, Victor answered. I didn't expect to hear from you until your release next year. I'm calling about Patricia, Douglas said without preamble, his voice tight with emotion. She's been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. Victor closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry to hear that. Is she receiving treatment? Trying to, Douglas replied. But her health insurance won't cover the specialist she needs. And with the restitution payments, there's no money for private care. Victor understood what wasn't being said. What are her doctors recommending? A surgical oncologist at Mayo Clinic. Dr. Winters. He has a new approach that could help, but there's a 6-month waiting list for new patients. I see, Victor said quietly. And you're calling me because... Douglas sighed heavily. Because you're the only person with both the resources and the connections who might help. Despite everything. Victor was silent for a long moment. I'll make some calls. Dr. Winters is on the board of one of my foundations. Thank you, Douglas said, the words clearly difficult for him. I know you have no reason to help us. I'm not doing it for you, Douglas, Victor clarified, or even for Patricia. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Something your family never quite understood. After ending the call, Victor walked to the edge of the observation deck again, looking out over the city he had helped shape. So much had changed in 2 years, his marriage, his business, his understanding of himself. The revenge he had executed against the Prescotts had been calculated and thorough, but it hadn't brought him the satisfaction he'd expected. Only when he began channeling his resources into creation rather than destruction did he find something resembling peace. His phone buzzed with a text from Dominic Weathers, his attorney. The Prescott cooperation has led to 3 more indictments. Ripple effects of your justice. Victor smiled slightly. Justice, not revenge. The distinction mattered. As the sun began to set over Minneapolis, casting long shadows across the cityscape, Victor thought about the words he had whispered to Natalie on that pivotal day when the check was presented, the words that had made her collapse. I've known about Brett for months. I've documented everything. And I promise you, by the time I'm done, you'll have nothing and no one. He had fulfilled that promise. The Prescotts had been exposed, Brett had fled, and Natalie had lost everything she valued. Victor had orchestrated their downfall with the same meticulous attention to detail he brought to his construction projects. But somewhere along the way, destruction had ceased to satisfy him. He had begun to build again. Not just buildings, but opportunities, programs, futures for people who needed second chances. Not because he had forgiven those who betrayed him, but because he refused to let their betrayal define him. The elevator door opened behind him, and Frank Donovan stepped onto the observation deck. Beautiful evening, Frank commented, joining Victor at the railing. It is, Victor agreed. How's the foundation work going? Frank had transitioned from private investigator to director of Victor's reentry program, using his skills to vet participants and create security protocols. Douglas Prescott's application came through today, Frank said, for post-release employment. Victor nodded. I expected that. And he's qualified. His cooperation led to significant prosecutions, and his work in the prison library has been exemplary. Frank hesitated. But given your history with him, I wanted to consult you before proceeding. Victor considered the irony of Douglas Prescott seeking help from the very foundation created by the man he had once treated with such disdain. Life had a way of coming full circle. Process the application, Victor decided. Standard procedures. No special treatment, good or bad. Frank nodded, understanding. And if he succeeds in the program? Then he rebuilds his life on different terms than before. That was always the point. As Frank left, Alexander returned, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Victor. To Hargrove Tower, Alexander proposed, raising his glass. And to whatever comes next. Victor clinked his glass against his friend's. To building instead of breaking. They drank in silence, watching as the city lights began to twinkle in the growing darkness. Victor thought about the journey that had brought him here, from sleeping on the couch during his in-laws' visit to standing atop a building bearing his name. From a husband dismissed as a disappointment to a man who had remade himself and, in the process, helped remake parts of his city. The Prescotts had underestimated him, as had Natalie and Brett. They had mistaken his patience for weakness, his restraint for lack of ambition. They never understood that while they focused on appearances, on status, on what others thought of them, Victor had been building something real, something that would outlast all of them. He hadn't forgiven their betrayal. He never would. But he had moved beyond it, channeling the cold fury that once drove him into a more constructive force. Not because he was virtuous or magnanimous, but because he had learned that true power lay not in destruction, but in creation. As night fell completely over Minneapolis, Victor finished his whiskey and turned away from the view. Tomorrow would bring new projects, new challenges, new opportunities to build. The past, with all its betrayals and lessons, was firmly behind him. He had prevailed, not just by breaking those who had wronged him, but by refusing to become what they were, people whose lives were defined by taking rather than creating, by appearance rather than substance. That was the truest revenge of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.